Shmuel, he sent out a number of handouts, and we thank him for continuing to work with us and continuing to send out the handouts, and Levi for the uploading, B'chulu, everybody that's Yaakov, everybody that contributes their time to make the Zoom operational. So the first, one of the handouts that was sent out, I believe we sent it out once before, comes from 2 pages in the Igros Ramchal. It's the Ramchal's biographical chart. And it gives you the year he was born and the major things he did during different years of his life. The reason I sent this out is today is the 15th day of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat. Tomorrow is the 16th day of Shvat, and Shabbos is the 17th day of Shvat. The 17th day of Shvat, something amazing happened in the life of the Ramchal. It was so amazing that the Ramchal wrote a tefillah to say on the 17th day of Shvat, which I sent out as well, and I'll explain in a moment. If you look at the chart, page 54 of the chart, where it says 24, it means the Ramchal was 24 years old. What happened when Ramchal was 24 years old? You figure 24 years old, maybe it's about the year 1728. Mashahu Kazeh, 1728. Like it's exactly when he was born, 1728, 1730. He's 24 years old. And it's, again, about 1728. For those of us who their frame of reference is the American Revolution of 1776, we're talking about before the United States of America existed. If your frame of reference is the Baal Shem Tov, then you're right here in the middle of right when the Baal Shem Tov is living. If your frame of reference is the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, we're dealing also in that area. So it's a great period of great tzaddikim that are flourishing. Yud Zayin Shvat. When the Ramchal was 24 years old, the following happened on the 17th day of Shvat, which is this Shabbos. Yom Mishte V'Simcha. The Ramchal established it as a joyous day, a day of party and joy. Now, you have to remember, when Ramchal says party, we're not talking about, big stakes here. We're talking about Kedushas, a Kedusha Simcha, Kedushas Mishte. What happened that he established the day? Every Yud Zayin Shvat, he would celebrate Yud Zayin Shvat from the time he was 24 years old. Lehivazda shel hachabura hakedoshim. They put together the holy group. This was the group of people who would learn 24/7 in the Beis Medrash of the Ramchal. The Ramchal became the Rosh Hashiva. And in the Igros HaRamchal, the collection of letters of the Ramchal, which are printed, okay, the Igros Ramchal, at the beginning they have the contract. They have a copy of the contract that every student, when I say student, we're not talking about 15-year-olds. Some of these people were in their 30s and 40s. They were older than the Ramchal, and they came to learn in his yeshiva. And they signed a contract. And the contract had all kinds of different provisions. The provision that I wanted to focus on is related to what I say almost every day after the Zoom. I say that everybody should internalize the idea that the Rebbeinu Shalom is the sovereign. He's the Echad, Yachad, Umiyuchad, the Gili HaYichud. When we do the Gili HaYichud, we internalize this. We donate that Gili HaYichud to the Klal Yisrael, and then the whole Klal Yisrael comes to, the Gili HaYichud comes to critical mass, and when it comes to critical mass, Mashiach ben David is going to be sent by the Rebbeinu Shalom, B'Tzayin Hashem Amish today, to finish the Gili HaYichud and give us the Beis HaMikdash. This is an idea that obviously was developed long before the Ramchal, but the Ramchal put it into the contract. I'm just going to read you a paragraph of the contract. This is what it looks like. I mean, it's not the original, it's not the hand script, but that's what it looks like in the Sefer. It's a contract paragraph by paragraph. And it has the signatures, the names of the people that signed the contract. So we know who the Talmidim were. Paragraph 9 of the contract says, "Shlo yichoshev halimer hazeh l'shem echad me'achavim l'tikkun prati, afilu kaparas avonos." The learning that we're going to do in this yeshiva, we're not doing this learning for our own self-good, and we're not even doing it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should forgive us personally for our own averos. Raktia boy hakavona shleima lagamri, letikin ashchina hakdoisha, uletikin kol Yisrael. We're not going to go into tikkun ashchina, but we are donating everything that we learn in this yeshiva to the tikkun of all of Klal Yisrael, for the benefit of all of Klal Yisrael, that all of Klal Yisrael should have a tikkun. That's what we're doing here in this yeshiva. We donate everything that we do here in this yeshiva to this huge pot called the pot of Klal Yisrael, so that Gans Klal Yisrael can benefit from what we're doing here. It's explained a little more in another paragraph. We don't expect the Rebbeinu Shalom to give us any reward for what we're doing here. We're not looking for personal reward. We're looking for the reward of Klal Yisrael. We are part of Klal Yisrael, and what we're doing here is B'Shem Kol Yisrael. We're doing it in the name of all the Jewish people. All the Jewish people should together benefit from this. And since I'm a member of Klal Yisrael, I will benefit from it too, but not individually. I will benefit as a member of the greater Klal Yisrael. And those are the things that they did in Yeshiva Ramchal. This yeshiva was established on the 17th day of Shvat. And Ramchal, because of the takanas that were made there, and the level of learning that occurred there, and because this was something that was done for all of Klal Yisrael, became a day of Mishnah v'Simcha. He was 24 years old when he did it. If you take a look at the chart, if you learn Ramchal, it's a very, very detailed chart. It tells you how old he was when he wrote each sefer. So if you go down to the place where it says 27, that's the last part of the chart on page 54. He's 27. If you go all the way to the left side of the chart, you'll see a couple of lines into the last box at the bottom, Das Tavunos. Ramchal wrote the Das Tavunos that we're learning when he was 27 years old. So this is a chart of his life, where he was at particular years in his life, what he wrote during those years of his life. So it's a reference point, so you have an understanding of the Ramchal's life. You also have a handout, which is the Tefillah Leil Yud Zayin Shvat. The Ramchal wrote a prayer to be said on the night of the 17th day of Shvat. That prayer would be said this year, Leil Shabbos. Okay. It's a Yiratzon. Everybody should keep this in mind. Try to say it Leil Shabbos. There's another tefillah that the Ramchal wrote for the Seudah. This is the tefillah for the night of the 17th of Shvat that can be recited tomorrow evening. And then he wrote a separate tefillah, which I didn't send out, which is a longer tefillah to say during the Seudah that's made. Now this year, 17th of Shvat is Shabbos, so we have a Seudah, but the 17th of Shvat could be a Tuesday night. So there's a tefillah to say the night of 17th Shvat, and also a tefillah to say during that special Seudah that you make for 17th Shvat. That's a longer tefillah that I didn't send out. But this is a shorter tefillah. Yotzam l'fanecha Hashem Elokim Elokei Yisrael, be it your will, Rebbeinu Shel Olam, shetirtza b'avodaseinu l'fanecha. You should accept, and you should be murutza. You should be satisfied with the work that we do before you. and shine upon us your holy light, and give us the zchus to make a kiddush Hashem in your world. Save us, protect us from all sin and from all evil. And give us the zchus that we be able to follow in your poyach with truth. And reveal your truth in the world. Remove all the avodah zarah from the world. Now, Ramchal wrote this. We saw he was 24 years old, so it's about, let's say, 1728. What avodah zarah was there in the world? What avodah zarah was there in the locality where Ramchal was living? So we can go through whether he's talking about Catholicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, or other kinds of avodah zarah. But it's a prayer to remove avodah zarah from the world. Wow, that's a big tefillah for us to say b'kavona atzuma tomorrow night. Rebbeinu Shalom, can you shut the mouths of those who speak falsehoods? And it's all over the place. It's everywhere. You can't listen to some. You can't read the news. You can't hear the news without hearing. You're looking for the tidbit that might be true. It's like boirer. Everything else, a bunch of false nonsense. And the false nonsense people have taken over the media, and they've taken over communications, and they're brainwashing the whole world to believe absolute fantasy, sheker, immorality, and perversion. So Rebbeinu Shalom, please shut the mouths of those who speak falsehoods. V'saver kol kazam min ha'olam, remove all lies from the world. And renew upon your people, the Jewish people, good decrees, Yeshuas, Nechamas, and break all the evil decrees, the coronas, the COVIDs, break all the evil decrees. Please give attention, open your eyes, Kaviyachol, and lead the Jewish people in good. Guide us, the Jewish people, with great compassion. And help save your Shechina, that's a Kabbalistic concept, Shechina, and save your children, very B'korev Mamish, with an eternal Tshuva, not a temporary Teshua, the real Tshuva that's going to be the eternal Tshuva, Kadova Shenema, as it says in the Pasuk, Yisrael Noisha B'Hashem Tshuva Seilomim B'Hashem Elokim Emes, God is the true God. That's a tefillah we can say tomorrow night, Leil Yud Zayin Shvat, and be a tremendous Ilui Neshama for the Ramchal that we spend so much time studying, and the Das Tevunas that we quote so often. And the tefillah, the bakasha should be said with kavana, and tefillah bakasha should come true. Mamish b'mher v'yamein. The next handout are two pieces of a Parshas Yitzchak. Now they deal with Bechira again, and they deal with Amalek. Amalek makes its appearance in this week's parsha. At the end of the parsha, Beshalach Vayover Amalek, it's a action-packed, quote-unquote, parsha. You have the Kriyas Yamsuf, you have the Oz Yoshir, you have the Mon of Amalek. The Parshas Yitzchak that we're about to learn deals with Bechira. And because we spend so much time on Bechira in so many different shiurim, we've been learning about Bechira in the Bereishis Shir, because we've been talking about the concept developed by Rav Hutner in the Parshas Yitzchak, that the source material for Bechira came on the second day of creation when God said, Yehi Rakir B'Soch Hamoyim, and he split the water to be water above and water below. Now we have a concept on the second day of above and below. And with that concept a guf is created from the dust below, a neshama from above, and now the guf and the neshama are put together on the sixth day. We have a human being who has this conflict between the dust that drives him in one way, the neshama that drives him to another way. And this is man's bechira, whether he's going to follow guf or neshama. But that idea that there's something from above and something from below is from the second day, and it's put together on the sixth day, and it becomes a human being with bechira. So the source material, the source idea for bechira occurs on day 2. Footner explained that in the Pachad Yitzchak. We then learned about bechira in great depth in the Das Tavunos, that the Ribono Shel Olam created the world lehetiv. The Ribono Shel Olam created the world in order to bestow good on people, bestow good on creation. The Ribono Shel Olam is the perfect good, and the perfect good, the Ribono Shel Olam had a ratzon, he had a will to do good, and therefore he wanted to do the perfect good. And to do the perfect good means that people are going to get reward, not free lollipops. If everybody gets the same lollipop, irrespective of what you do, then nobody really got anything. If, however, if a person does and he gets a certain amount, and another person doesn't do as much and he gets a less amount, then we have a concept of schava oynish. And that's the way Ribono Shel Olam created the world, because the ultimate good is not just getting the lollipop, it's feeling emotionally good about yourself that you earned the lollipop. And the Ribono Shel Olam b'chachmosei hatzuma created the world. We talked about that in great length when we began the Sefer. The Yesoin Asher Olav Nivne Kol HaPinyin, the Ramchal said at the beginning of Das Tavunos, the principle upon which the whole thing is built, the whole system exists, is that the Ribono Shel Olam create a perfectly imperfect world so that we can perfect it. And the way we perfect it, obviously, is with the tools that God gave us to perfect the Torah mitzvahs. And when we perfect the world, we become partners with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creation. The Gemara has a lashon in Masechta Shabbos Nasa Shutef LaKadosh Baruch Hu Ma'aseh Creations. We become partners in perfecting the world. We become partners in perfecting the world. We get reward for finishing God's work. In order to do that, we have to have bechira, we have to have free choice. Now, I've said several times, I think it's still available. I don't know why it wouldn't be available. There's a pamphlet written by Rav Aryeh Kaplan, Zechron Tzaddik Levracha. It's called If You Were God. If you have this pamphlet, read it. If you've read it, read it again. If you don't have it, try to get it, because he puts into English in a systematic way the Das Tavunos that we've been talking about bechira, and God created man in order to bestow good on him. And I'm going to, before we read a little part of this Pachad Yitzchak today, I'm going to read to you a little piece of the beginning of Rav Aryeh Kaplan Zatzal, If You Were God. And he's talking about the question, it's Rav Aryeh Kaplan's book, If You Were God. Shkoyach Rabbi Samet, Rav Kaplan's yard site was yesterday. The Neshama should have Aliyah, should be a Melitz Yosha for the Kisya covered. He was I'm not going to even say anything about him. It's just an unbelievable mind. Nebuch taken away from us at a very early age. I believe he was a physicist, he was a mathematician, tremendous Talmud Chacham, and tremendous Bekiyas. So Rav Kaplan writes the following, and he's talking about evil. How did evil come into the world? Sound familiar, Rabbi Isai? We've been dealing that in the Das Tavunos. How did evil get into the world, and what's the purpose of evil? So he writes, to even begin to understand this, we must delve into the very purpose of creation. This purpose requires a creature responsible for its own actions. This in turn requires that men have free will. If God would have wanted a race of puppets, then he would have created puppets. If he would have wanted robots, then he would have made robots. This is what we talk about in the Astavunos. The Rosh didn't want robots. But this is not what God wanted. He wanted human beings with free will, responsible for their actions. But as soon as you have free will, you have the possibility of evil. The deeper we probe, the clearer this becomes. To the best of our understanding, God created the universe as an act of love. It was an act of love so immense that human mind cannot even begin to fathom it. The Astavunos coming. God created the world basically as a vehicle upon which he can bestow his good. Hatova, lehetiv. But God's love is so great that any good that he bestows must be the greatest good possible. The perfect God wants to bestow the greatest possible good. Anything less would simply not be enough. But what is the greatest good? What is the ultimate good that God can bestow on his creation? What's the biggest schar a person can have? Sil Shisharim tells us. The Vekus, to be able to bond to the Rabbanu Shalom. If you think for a moment, the answer should be obvious. The ultimate good is God himself. The greatest good that he can bestow is himself. There is no greater good than achieving a degree of unity with the Creator himself. It is for this reason that God gave man the ability to resemble God. God therefore gave man free will. Just as God acts as a free being, so does man. Just as God operates without prior restraint, so does man. Just as God can do good as a matter of his own choice, so can man. According to many commentators, this is the meaning of man being created in the image of God. This is man's Tselem Elokim. And he continues and explains this idea of Bechira, freedom of choice, freedom of will, and that's the tachlis of the Bria, so we can make choices, and making choices we can get schar, and that schar is being able to cling and being dovik in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ultimate good. This is the purpose of the world. The purpose of creation was lehetiv. In order for a person to earn the good, he has to make correct choices. To make correct choices, there's evil in the world that a person rejects and walks away from by making the right choices through his bechira. That's the purpose of the creation of the world. Comes Amalek, and Amalek wants to destroy God's world. They're not going to blow it up with atomic bombs. They're not going to blow it up with nuclear weapons. They're going to let the world exist, but they're going to destroy the very purpose for which it was created. The very purpose for which it was created was man's free will, and man to understand that has free will. And through man understanding that he has free will, he'll make choices. He'll make the right choices. God will be able to give him reward. Man will be able to perfect the perfectly imperfect world, and he will get rewarded from that. And now the Rabbanu Shalom's purpose in creating the world was fulfilled. Comes Amalek and says, nothing doing. The world can exist, but not God's motive in the world. We're going to destroy God's purpose in the world. We're going to destroy God's purpose in creating the world. How did he do that? We'll see that in a moment. But when the Rabbanu Shalom said at the end of this week's parsha, Milchama Hashem b'Amalek midor dor, I will never finish the war with Amalek. At the end of Parshas Kiseitze, it says, Timche, this needs to be wiped out from the world. This is why it needs to be wiped out in the world. This is why it's an everlasting war against Amalek till Yamach Shemam v'Zichron, they're wiped out of the world. Why do they need to be wiped out of the world? Because you can't fix Amalek. Amalek is not a destructive person. Amalek's not trying to destroy a country. They're not trying to destroy a people. Yeah, they're killers. What they want to do, though, is they want to destroy God's purpose in creating the world. Not about just we want to conquer a country here or conquer a country there. We very rarely find any wars of Amalek where Amalek's going out. We know that Amalek rose to power, left power. We don't see Amalek looking to dominate the whole world and to rule the whole world until, of course, if you hold that the Nazis were generations later descendants of Amalek, Yachol liot. Amalek's desire in the world is to remove the purpose of creation, to destroy the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is God is going to do good based upon man's free choice. We are going to prove to man that he has no free choice. Amalek are the predeterminists, and this Parshas Yitzchak we spoke about many, many times over the years in Shiurim. It's Yesod Sheb Yesod is to understand the world that we live in right now, and it was written many years ago. Yesod is to understand what we're dealing with here in the world and how holy this idea is that we work on in the Bereshit here and that we work on in the Ramchal. How holy is this idea of Bechira? The Rambam that we learned in Hilchos Tshuva, when we're learning Hilchos Tshuva between Rosh and Elul, Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, the Rambam calls it Me'Yesodei Hadas. I believe he uses the words from foundation. It's one of the most. It's a principle upon which it rests. If you don't believe in Bechira, there's no Torah. If there's no Bechira, then we're, as Rav Kaplan mentioned, we're robots and puppets. Robots and puppets don't get rewarded. God pre-planted certain ideas in your head. He pre-planted certain emotions. He pre-planted certain characteristic traits. And now you're a robot. You go off and do what God pre-planted in you, predetermined. Why would you get rewarded for doing what God already made you do? And why would the other guy get punished for what God already pre-planted in him? What kind of God are we talking about here, the Rambam says? The holiness of the idea of Bechira is what makes the whole system we talked about in the Das Tvunos, the Kononius, the gears, the what looks like a watch, the gears turning, the system. It's a mechanical system. What makes this whole mechanical system work is because man turns the gears and he makes the choices which gears he'll turn, the good gears, Chashon, the evil gears. You take that out, you have no purpose for God's creation. Amalek attacks that idea. You are a robot. Everything's been determined. And Amalek's a groiser chacham with a longer board, with longer pairs, because they can prove this to you in a firm way. And that's what the Parshas Yitzchak is going to talk about. We need to be very, very careful when we talk about the holiness of Bechira. We need to understand that this is the foundation of Yiddishkeit. It is the foundation upon which God created the world. That's the purpose in creation, lahatova. And hatova means you're going to make decisions for which God will reward you. If I remove Bechira, then I have no purpose in creation. You just destroy God's world. The world is going to be a beautiful place. There'll be cherry trees, there'll be pomegranate trees, there'll be wonderful zoos with beautiful animals, but people will be walking around as zombies. They'll be robots, and they'll believe that everything's been predetermined. There is no purpose in that kind of world. Amalek wants to destroy God's purpose in the world, and God says, I will fight you forever until I wipe you out. Let's start with the left side of the page in the Parshas Yitzchak. And the top of the page, it says Zechronos. This is not something that Rav Hutner wrote. This comes from a sefer that was written after he was nifter. And it's a dedication to Rav Hutner, memory, so to speak, of Rav Hutner. And there are a lot of things in that sefer. It's a thick sefer, many things in there that were not published in the Parshas Yitzchak. Besides that, Rabbi Yonasan David, his son-in-law, La'arichus Yom V'Shonim, wrote a biography about Rav Hutner, and in there he talks about many things that Rav Hutner said over the years that are not a piece of Parshas Yitzchak. They're just things he said, and he's being quoted. So let's begin with this. We name Belineda. I don't know if we're going to get to the right side of the page today. If we don't, and I don't know if we will, if we don't, then Belineda, we are going to do it Sunday because of the Kedushas HaBechira and the fact that we're spending so much time on Bechira. This is something that must be understood about Bechira and the time we live in. So if we don't have time to finish it today, we'll finish it on Sunday. This is the introduction. Sometimes Rav Hutner would he would draw attention to someone that was listening to him. He would talk. Mabit choder u'makoiri shel kedusha, a very deep and shoresh, a makor, a source, a holy source, al ma'oris tarbusiyim, and cultural events, or historia min ha'olam sheba'bachutz, which is what we try to do many times here in Shir, to try to take a Torah view of what is happening outside there in the world. The Torah is what goes on outside the world was well known to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma'aseh Bereshis and before Ma'aseh Bereshis. And what's happening in the world, as we learned in Das Tavunas, is a galgal. It's everything is happening, even what the chaos, percolating in the chaos, is Bias Mashiach. And Rav Hutner would comment on cultural things that are happening or historical events that are happening, quote unquote, outside the walls of the yeshiva. And he would look at it in a Torah-tic way. Ha'aris shebenoyek shel olam toifes mitzuri tikone svarim shleimim ha'yuismatzos etzlei b'mishpat echakayil. Things that other people would have to write a whole book of analysis on. What is happening to the culture? And what does this historical event mean? And there are books written about it, hundreds, 200, 300 pages of books, an analysis. Rav Hutner would be able to get to the bottom of it in a sentence. And this is what he said in this context, the context of the times in which he was living. So maybe he said this in the 50s, maybe in the 60s. Darwin, Hichnis materialism leteva. Materialism means gashmias. Gashmias means, as we said, we're made up of two things. There's the guf, the ofamin hadama, the gashmi, the dense, dark dust of the earth that makes up our body and wants to drive us towards more and more darkness. If you don't harness that guf with the neshama, it'll take you to unbelievable, terrible places, all kinds of desires, all kinds of addictions. And you have a neshama. A neshama is working on the guf, as one in the Astavunas, to change the guf into a holy thing. Darwin Hichnis materialism leteva. Darwin taught the world that the teva, quote unquote, remember last week we learned the Ramban, which we also didn't finish, but we learned the Ramban about the word teva, quote unquote, nature. Someone that believes in nature, the Ramban said, Ein lechelik b'Torahs Moshe. He has no chelik in the Torah of Moshe. There is no teva. Nothing happens naturally. Naturally simply means that God is performing a miracle that he does so often that you've taken it for granted, you don't see the miracle. When God made Kriyas Yamsuf in this week's Parsha, we go, oh, that's unbelievable. But when we put a pomegranate seed in the ground and some water comes on it and some sunshine comes on it, and we see these beautiful red pomegranates come out with a crown on it, we say, oh, of course, a pomegranate tree. What else would you expect? People have been doing it for thousands of years. Pomegranate seed in the ground, pomegranate tree comes out. That's not a miracle, that's nature. If you look at the world like that, you have no share in Torahs Moshe. Torahs Moshe teaches us that there's no such thing that God's not controlling, except it's something that happens so often, we get blinded and we think that it's Teva. But Teva doesn't exist. Teva is a hidden miracle. It's all miracles. So the same thing, the same way that we go, oh, wow, Kriyas Yamsuf, we should be able to go, wow, look at that pomegranate. Where'd the pomegranate come from? What am I, crazy? I put this tiny little thing in the ground and a whole tree came out and now there's pomegranates. I can eat the pomegranates and they're delicious. Yeah, that's nature. What am I, crazy? It's God. And we need to begin to appreciate God in the Teva. Came Darwin. and he did an anti-Torah. He put materialistic ideas into Teva. He brought us back to that old Avodah Zorah of Teva. It's nature. The way the world came about was evolution. There's no God. We don't see God in the Bria. What do you mean you don't see God in the Bria? I see God in every pomegranate. I see God in every tulip. I see God in every zebra. I see God in a monkey. Darwin says there's no God here. What are you talking about? You came from a monkey, and a monkey came from something else, and something else came from something else, something else, something else, something else. He removed God in the teva of the world, quote unquote. The word nature now means nature, not the nature of the Ramban of a hidden miracle. It's now the Avodah Zarah nature. There is no God. This happens by natural forces. By natural forces, monkey turned into man. So Darwin took materialism and injected it back into the Teva and made the Avodah Zarah of Teva. Karl Marx, Hichnis materialism l'historia. Karl Marx took materialism, the idea of Gashmi, and he put into history. He had a whole interpretation about how historical events occur. Yeah, they occur because of the masses, and it swings back and forth. And these are natural events that can be expected. They're so natural that can be expected, they can be predicted. The pendulum swings this way, and then it swings this way, and then it comes this way, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's no God that's running history. It's the natural events of mankind that turn the pendulum back and forth. So now we have Darwin, who says there's no God in the creation. And now we have Marx that says that there's no God running history. Freud, what did the Zygmunt do? The Zygmunt hichnis materialism l'toich nishmas ha'odem atzman. Freud did the final job. Freud came and took materialism, Gashmi, and put it into man's soul. You are soulless. You are made up of an id, shmid, kid, wid. You are made up of sexual desires. And if you don't understand, that's because you don't understand yourself. If you need to suck your thumb, if you need to scratch your ear, if your toe bothers you, if you're depressed, if you're overly active, if you suffer from anxiety, we're going to go back to your need to have sexual desires. We're going to go back to id, shmid. We're going to go back to your Oedipus complex. We're going to figure out why you wanted to sleep with your mother. Alla good demises. So what did Freud do? He took the most base human goof and he destroyed the neshama. He basically said that what you are made up of is a sexual desire. So what happened here? Rafutna says in one sentence. What someone would have to write books about, it's in one sentence. Darwin put materialism into the Teva. There's no God in the creation. It's all evolution. Came Marx and said there's no God that runs history. Who runs history? Man. Man's actions. Came Freud and he said there's no neshama, there's no godliness spark to you. It's all your own goof. It's all your dense, dark body that runs the whole thing. And if we can deal with your sexual desires and your Oedipus complex, you'll be a healthy person. So Rafutna continued. Kol ha-materialistim gorim churban l'kedusha. Every time one of these people come along and they materialize the world, materialize meaning the material aspects of the world are more important, like Marx in history and like Darwin with nature, they cause a churban to the sanctity and the holiness of the world. That's what those two did. Omnam Freud is the worst of all three. Freud took a sword and stuck it into the pareiches. So Rafutna is using poetic language. We learned about this on Tisha B'Av. With Titus Harasha, Titus, when he was destroying the second base Hamikdash, he entered the Kodesh Kadoshim with a prostitute, v'chulu v'chulu nebuch, and he took a sword and stuck a sword in the parayches, in the curtain, and blood started coming out of the curtain, and he thought that he killed God. So Rafutna is using that idea poetically now, while Marx destroyed Kedusha in the world on the level of God being part of history, and Darwin destroyed Kedusha in the world in the sense of taking God out of being the creator of the world. Freud went into the Beis HaMikdash. What does the Beis HaMikdash mean? He went into your neshama, and he stuck a sword in your neshama, and he wants to kill your neshama so that you have no neshama, you don't believe in a neshama, and what do you have? A base goof and sexual desires that explain everything about you. That is the last stab in Kedusha. You destroy God as the creator, Darwin. You destroy God as the one who controls history, Marx. But now you take the dagger and you walk into the Kodesh Kadoshim, you walk into the neshama, and you kill the neshama, and what's left is now a base goof. Now what you have is he stuck the sword in the parayches, and now the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. V'kach kosev bachas me'groisav. And Rafutna also wrote in one of his letters, Avi havois hatuma, the most tuma, the worst kind of tuma, the worst kind of contamination, the worst kind of tuma in Kedusha, shel tekufa seinu of our time. You're talking about in Rafutna's time, let's say he's writing this in the 50s or the 60s, who has zilzul b'tzuras of. That is the zilzul, the denigration of man, man's tzura. What did Rav Kaplan, Zechron Tzaddik Levracha, just tell us? Man's tzura, man's tzelem Elokim. How is he comparable in some way? How is he an image of God? Because the same way God has free will, God gave man free will. The same way God created a world out of his free will, man can join in God's creation. Man can perfect the imperfect world through his choices, through his free will. The same way God started creation through his free will, man can complete that creation through his free will. But you have to believe in free will to be able to finish God's work. And through that, you become a Tzelem Elokim. You're in the image of God. God began the work, you complete the work. You're in the image of God. What is the denigration of man? V'hosef limsa bermiza soid omuk shebetayfazu. And Rav Hutner continued with just a remiza, just a hint of what is happening in that time. And he's writing this. The thing that makes man different, that makes man a Tzelem Elokim, it differentiates him from the tree and the animal, etc., is the koyach habchira. Man has this holy ability to have free will and choose. V'ivtichonu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a promise. Ki ba'achris hayom tevutel skulas habchira. At the end of days, there will not be any bechira. We talked about this many times. The Gemara in Sukkah and Daf Mem Beis tells us that Allah said, Love HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to take the Yetzer Hara, he's going to shecht them. There won't be a Yetzer Hara. Bechira is over. Why? Because no point in bechira. Hayom la'asoisam u'mochel lekabel scharim, the Gemara says. Today is the work time. Tomorrow is the day we get our reward. Today we work. We're living. We have bechira. We make choices, and we're creating an account of zechusim that we can have olam haba through that account. Tomorrow is pension collection day. Olam haba. In olam haba, you don't have bechira to put more money into there, to put more zechusim into the account. That's not olam haba. You're not putting more money into the account. Whatever you can put into the account is today. So la'achras hayom, at the end of days, there's no bechira. Mikivan sheshoif soif aimedasi abchira lespato. Since we know that bechira is eventually going to be this battle, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to take bechira out of the world. So the closer we get to Mashiach, the closer we get to the end of bechira. Hare hakfira hayoysa smucha la'achras hayomim. He hakfira beskulas habchira shel adam, and therefore our footnote says the kfira, the apikursis, the denial that will happen in Mashiach time, leading up to Bias Mashiach, is the denial of bechira. In other words, as we get closer to Mashiach and closer to bittul of the bechira, the more the evil forces in the world will try to, so to speak, bring that into the world earlier. It'll be premature. It'll be a premature birth. Bittul habchira is coming, and the evil forces can sense this. And therefore they want to take the bechira away from you even before it's time to take the bechira away from you. After all, it's coming anyways. And therefore, we have to strengthen ourselves in these days with the belief in Bechira and the Yesod of Bechira. We need to fight off all the Darwinisms and all the Marxisms and all the Freudianisms that are markedly pointed to no Bechira. You come from a monkey. That's all you are, is a goof, dense, dark goof with terrible sexual desires and the Oedipus complex. We need to get away from this craziness, from this stuff. It's kfira. It destroys kedusha in the world. It takes away your freedom of choice to understand that you're a guf and a neshama, and you can make choices. Ashek mekfira zu novea kol azilzul b'tzuras odishon tekufasenu. And with each and every step of denigration of human bechira, we end up with a denigration of the human being himself. You have turned the man into a monkey. The stabbing of the paroiches in the Holy of Holies, nishmas ha'adam, the stabbing, the killing off of a person's neshama, shehu kfirase shel Freud, that's the kfira that Freud brought into this world. And I may be talking here to some psychologists. It doesn't make a difference to me one iota. I've talked about this many, many times. And the Sridei Eish also wrote a mimer about this, the terrible thing that Freud did to holiness in the world. Shem Rishoyim Yirkov, and the destruction he brought upon the world. I have to find it in my machzan. I keep on saying my machzan. We still haven't fully unpacked the machzan from the Shiputs, which is 18 months later, still not finished. I found it long, long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. I found on the internet a 6-hour, I think it was 6 hours, a 6-hour documentary. Was done in 3 parts, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, by a very famous British psychiatrist. I forget his name now. And I was able to download this. And then I took it to a computer whiz, and he made me about 12 copies of this 6-hour documentary. And they're somewhere in a box in my machzan. And I gave out some copies to different people. Bernay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Yitzchak. And it's a history of Freud, a history of Freud's brother-in-law. Psychiatry was used in America in order to persuade people to do things that they really didn't want to do and they really shouldn't do. And I'll give you an example. On the video, on this documentary, they prove, it's not even they prove, it's there. It's not like maybe yes, maybe no. It's mamish goli v'yadua that Freud, I believe his brother-in-law, maybe his nephew, I believe his brother-in-law, there was a problem in America in the 20s The cigarette manufacturers were going bankrupt. Not enough people were smoking. So somebody came up with a great idea. How do we get women to smoke? We need to increase the public, that the number of people that are smoking. So we're looking for how to get women to smoke. Who did they hire to figure out how to get women to smoke? They need to advertise. Now, in those days, it wasn't a woman like to smoke. So how are we going to make it women like to smoke? Who did they hire? They hired psychiatrists to figure out how a woman thinks and how, based upon that train of thought, we can make cigarette smoking woman-like. So if you ever seen the pictures, they had these cigarettes with plastic tubes. Thank you, Rabbi Yitzchak. The Century of the Self. Oh, it's still on YouTube? Sure. It's still on YouTube. It's called The Century of the Self. Now listen to the name of the documentary. The Century of the Self. We talk about this so much. The Century of the Self. The selfies. These people, Freud and his family, began a process of creating the self. It's all about you. It's all about your sexual desire. And they completely destroyed the world. Today we've got the transgenders and the gays, they completely destroyed the world. And they wanted to destroy the world. That was their goal, to destroy the world. They knew what they were doing. And the purpose of creation was God giving man bechira, God giving man the ability to make choices, and through those choices to get reward. And those choices become a source. Those choices are sourced in guf neshama, and they killed a person's belief in a neshama and told him you're a shtick guf, and all your problems comes from your sexual desire. When we work that out, you'll be a happy person. Forget about the neshama, forget about religion, forget about bechira, forget about everything. These people destroyed the world. The world that we see today is the world of liberal psychology. If you have people that are listening to me that are liberal psychologists, sei gesund. Also steht in Heilige Svarim. There's psychiatry, certainly, that is helpful, and there's psychology that certainly is helpful. But when you deal with Freudian psychology and Freudian psychoanalysis, you're dealing with a churban olam. Somebody wants to do something that's practical and something that may be helpful, read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and see how he deals with psychoanalysis and how he deals with logotherapy. Nishmas ha'odam shu privase shel Freud. Man's soul, which was denied by Freud, miuchedes umut-emes hilet kufa hasmucha lachos hayomim. Freud brought into the world something that was about to come to the world, but the world wasn't ready for it yet. The bittul habchira will occur when God says the world is ready for bittul bchira, not when Shem Rishoyim Yirkov Lahavdil Elf Avdolis Freud says we're going to be mavatul bchira. And so as we proceed, we're dealing with kedushas habchira. How many times do we hear nebuch? How many times do we hear that people are born gay? It's not a choice that they make. They're born gay. How many times do we read about conversion therapy, where therapists have a success rate where they can take a gay boy or a gay girl and put them, quote unquote, straight? How many governments around the world have banned conversion therapy? I believe, in the state of New Jersey, it's a crime for a psychologist or psychiatrist to attempt to take a minor and make him straight. Go to jail for that. What are you trying to do to him? You're destroying the child. He was born that way. What are we talking about here? We're talking about mamish the bittul habchir. There's a world war running around us out there that brings the greatest perversions to the world and says God created man perverted. God created this boy gay. God created this girl as a lesbian. God created this boy, but he made a mistake. It's supposed to be a girl. God created this girl. It was a mistake. It's supposed to be a boy. That's why they're transgenders. God made a mistake. We're dealing here with the unraveling of God's purpose in the world through the work of Freud, the work of Marx, the work of Darwin, and ultimately the source for all of this Marx, Darwin, Freud is Amalek. Blineda next week, on Sunday, Blineda will send out a reminder. We're going to work on the Pachad Yitzchak, the Pachad Yitzchak in Purim, how Amalek is the source of this destruction, of the attempted destruction of God's purpose in the world, and God's response to that is in this week's Parsha, Melchama Hashem Amalek midor. I will always wage war against you, and in Parshas Kisei, I will wipe your memory from the world. This is a war not about a particular country or particular sovereignty. This is the war in order to make sure that God's purpose in creation is maintained. The holiest of all possible wars is to maintain God's purpose in the world through maintaining the holiness of Bechira and stop buying, chas v'sholem, buying into this nonsense. It's a bunch of nonsense. God did not create people to be perverted. He created people with Bechira, and that's Kedushas Yisrael, and that's the message we have for the world. Lift yourself up. Be holy. You have freedom of choice. You're not some kind of animal. Have freedom of choice. And this is a war that God wants us to fight every generation. Boy, today it's a battle. Today, if you fight this battle, you get fired for talking this way. You get thrown off of YouTube for talking this way. You get thrown off Facebook. You get thrown off this. Terrible things happen if you talk this way. We need to talk this way. Because what we're talking about here is not some subject. We're trying to defend God's purpose in creating the world, and God told us this is a war in every generation. And with the Rebbeinu Shalom's help, we're going to be Zoichet to Timcha Zeich Amalek. We're going to wipe this silliness, this garbage, this perversion. We're going to wipe it out of the world. Amen. We should be Zoichet to the Gilei HaYichud. All Yidden that need Panasha should have panasa. All Yidden that need bracha should have brachas. All Yidden in Yeshua should have Yeshuas. All Yidden in Nechamas should have Nechamas. All Yidden in Refuah should have Refuahs. Before Shalem Moshe Zelik ben Mazel. Before Shalem Yosef Chaim ben Shoshana Menucha. Before Shalem Liba Malka Bas Chaya Braida. L'chol Chole Akaroina B'Zech Shachol Yisrael. For Snev Shuas Aguf Hash Magalos Makriv Naimer Amen. Refuahs Yeshuas Nechamas brachas panasa can only come from the Rebbeinu Shalom. He's the Echad Yochanan Yuchad. He's the ultimate sovereign. And when we believe in this and we internalize this in ourselves, we're doing our own Gilei HaYichud, which we donate to Klal Yisrael to create this critical mass of Gilei HaYichud, in which we donate to Klal Yisrael. So B'Ratzon Hashem Mamish today to Rosh Hashanah send Mashiach, and Haka will be Zoichet to the Bittul Abchir, will be Zoichet to the Bittul Ra, will be Zoichet to the Orak Kodesh Baruch Hu, will end the Hastaras Panim. We'll be able to go to Beis Hamikdash and bring a Machatzas Shekel and bring a Korban. We'll be able to have Tois V'Shaviyas, beginning Pesach and beginning Shavuos. We'll have all the halachos Tois V'Shaviyas. Again, tomorrow night, Leil Shabbos, 17th of Shvat, where we get this idea from to donate our work to Klal Yisrael for the Gilei HaYichud, and whatever we get is only to be benefit. Whatever we do is to benefit Klal Yisrael, and we're gonna benefit from it as members of Klal Yisrael, but not as selfies. Even in holy aspects, even in Avodas Hashem, a person could become selfish and do it for himself. Donate it to Klal Yisrael. Donate it to Klal Yisrael for the betterment of all Klal Yisrael, for the betterment of mankind. Everybody have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Go where you need to go. Don't go where you don't need to go. And even when you need to go, you make a cheshbon. When should I go? How should I go? So that it's less crowded. All these cheshbonis are holy cheshbonis. Navodas Hashem. It's a mitzvah. The last two Beis Yosefs and Choshen Mishpat. The last Ber Hagoyel and Choshen Mishpat is Navodas Hashem to keep yourselves happy, notwithstanding all the craziness, the tipshus, mamish, the rishus that you see on the news. People making large weddings. It's a rishus gomor. There is no tzidkis to it. It doesn't make a difference if the person who's sitting at the head table is wearing a koisa spotik, with a koisa strom, with a koisa board, with a koisa payas. It's a rishus. It's an absolute rishus to do this to the people of Eretz Yisrael. It's an absolute rishus to do it to the Jewish community. It's absolute rishus to do it to the world. Instead of Kindlech, people are complaining, why aren't Kindlech learning Torah in yeshiva? If the yeshivas could be open and people could be going to work to have their panasa. Maybe if we stopped the 300 or 3,000 people weddings, we would be able to stop the spread. But the same people that are making the 3,000 Rebisha, Hasidisha, Litvisha, whatever it is, they make these big weddings, they then complain why the Talmud Torah is not open. Of course Talmud Torah is not open. Why are you making these weddings? You have Hasidus, you have Rosh Yeshivas who are making these weddings, and then they complain when the government closes the Talmud Torah. Of course they close the Talmud Torah. The thing is spreading like wildfire. Why do you have to have a 3,000 person wedding? To spread it like wildfire. Stop the weddings and keep the yeshivas open. It's Rishayim. They're mamish arishas. I'm not talking for myself. Everybody's read it. Gedolim have said this is arishas. Mamish arishas. It was reported in the news, I'm not going to say the name. There was a huge wedding in Borough Park last week. And now there's COVID all over this group. What did they do here? It's Rishayim. We're not talking about stupid people. Stupid people were in quote unquote wave one. We're now almost a year into this. This is not stupid. This is evil. And people don't care about someone else. This is the century of the self. This is Freud, Marx, and Darwin. People are only concerned about themselves or their little group, but have no concern about anybody else. They don't care if someone else's business is closed. They don't care if the economy collapses. They're worried about their wedding. Everybody take care of yourselves. Do what you need to do to stay safe and healthy. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful day. A good Shabbos. We'll send them a notice that on Sunday we will do Mishnah Yeshavias, and then we'll do the Pachad Yitzchak on Bechira, which ties into the Das Tavunos, which we usually do on Sunday. We'll do the Pachad Yitzchak about Bechira. Everybody have a wonderful day. A good Shabbos. Kodesh. Sei gesund.